Andreas, one of your public statements that has received increased attention is that generative AI has a growing problem, and that is us, humans. Tell me, what's the problem with us?
That's an awesome question.
Generative AI has a growing problem, and that's us, humans. Why that's the case and why businesses should care about Gen AI in general. This and more we discuss in this episode. Let's go. This is the Innovation Rockstars podcast, where we share unfiltered conversations about all things innovation with leading minds who are shaping the future. And my name is Chris Miroth, and with me today is Andreas Welsch. Andreas is a Chief AI Strategist at Intelligence Briefing. He's also an adjunct lecturer at the Westchester University of Pennsylvania, and also, if he has some time left, obviously, a VP and Head of AI Marketing at SAP. And you're also a frequent speaker and guest at various occasions, online, offline, you name it, you get it. Andreas, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited about the opportunity.
Same. Andreas, one of your public statements that has received increased attention is that generative AI, Gen AI, has a growing problem, and that is us, humans. Tell me, what's the problem with us?
That's an awesome question. Look, I like to think about what are the different angles around generative AI. What does it mean for us in our business lives, in our personal lives? And I'm glad we're able to have this conversation in this frame as well. So one of the ways that I see humans are creating a problem or are becoming a problem for AI is that these large models that are underneath these new generations of software, these new generative AI tools like ChatGPT, like Google Gemini, Microsoft's Copilot, and so on, right? They rely at the end of the day on data that humans have created and even that humans have curated, because there's so much data that even any of us create on a daily basis. So multiply it by any number of people that you like that are online, for example, and that you get so many different signal points, and that the information that you get there might not always be what you want or what you expect, right? We know that companies like OpenAI and others have scraped the web for data to train these models, and you know that the data doesn't only come from the pretty and rosy places of the internet, right? There are many many corners as well, whether it's Twitter or Reddit or some other forums where maybe there are opinions and values shared that might not be the majority's of opinions, right? So we do need to have humans, and these companies do have humans in place that tweak the information that goes into the models, that maybe do some content filtering and reviewing. So that's very labor intensive, but also looking at it from a mental health perspective, right? It's very taxing if there's information that you see, whether it's written or it's in images, and you need to decide, is this okay? Is that an issue? Do we need to do something? Do we need to block it? So it's very taxing. But then also on the other hand, if you think of things like image generation and image classification, think of insurance cases, right? Many insurance companies today, at least in the US, let you take a picture of the damage on your car, and then they have a machine learning model, AI model in the background that makes a decision or recommendation. Hey, is this something we need to give to an adjuster and somebody needs to come out and assess this? Or does it look like it's just a scratch and we can write you a check and you go to your local body shop and have it replaced? So there are people doing task work that are reviewing these images. Say they're drawing bounding boxes around where that damage is apparently there in that image. But because this task work, again, is more anonymous, right? You might not even know who you work for, what's the overall goal and objective of why you're being asked to do this. You can also lack a sense of purpose. So through coverage in the media at the end of last year, I think there were a number of stories where it was found that task workers are also using generative AI in their work to be faster, to be more effective doing this. But that's exactly the problem, because actually that's the reason why we need humans in the first place, because these models are not perfect. So we need somebody to review this. So if humans then again use other generative AI tools to do that review, we're reintroducing the same kinds of errors, mistakes, and faults. So that's why I think this vicious cycle, in that sense, humans can really be a problem.
That's interesting. Just recently, and by saying recently, I mean probably 2 or 3 months ago, there was a group at X, formerly Twitter, and that group shared some of the successes in, quote unquote, hacking ChatGPT by OpenAI, because what they actually ended up with is a set of instructions that ChatGPT was given by OpenAI to behave in a certain way. And I want to refer back to the very first thing you said, which is the data we produce, as humans, and which is obviously one of the foundational things those LLMs, for example, as GPT-4 and its other versions rely on, are trained on. So yes, on the one hand, it's different types of data. Some data might not be, you don't want it in there because it's maybe ethically or maybe even, from a legal point of view, not correct. But at the same time, if are sense checking the data, maybe even fact checking the data, you also open the door to a potential limitation or maybe even censorship of the data. Because again, who is testing and supervising those who actually write those prompts, who actually give those guidances to the AI? Is that another part of the problem that we probably run into if you now introduce human checks and manual checks to how these systems are trained and what data is used?
I think that's a really interesting angle that you bring up. I think there's certainly some potential there, right? We talk about bias a lot when we talk about AI as well, whether it's the bias that each and every one of us holds that manifests itself in the data that we create that becomes part of those models, or then certainly the bias and the somewhat biased lens with which and through which people are reviewing the information and are making decisions. Is it permissible? Is it not? So I think there's a probably multi-layer problem, if you will, of where bias is introduced at the raw material, raw data, and then also the curation. But I think also last week, right, we saw in the news that companies are trying to correct for some of those biases that you see in the data, right? Just because there's a larger population of data and data points available. So if you use image generation tools, for example, I tried this out the other day and I said, create a portrait of a business leader. Well, actually, the results that I got from my image generator were male, Caucasian, and of a certain age. We all know that there are business leaders that are not male, that are not Caucasian, that are younger. Right? But just because there are so many data points available, and that seems to be the common denominator, if you will, or the dominant examples of this, that's why we're seeing these results. So companies are also trying to compensate for that and are trying to introduce more diversity by saying create more diverse results, right? If you generate a portrait of a diverse business leader, you definitely get different results. But the issue then is if you apply it to any task, to any image generation, if you look at things like historic information, right, then ending up with diversity where historically there has been none, that's an issue, right? That's when you read about it in the news and how come they did this and they're representing that factually inaccurate. Well, on the other hand, if they don't, then there's an outcry of why are we only seeing white, male, mid-50s business leaders when I ask for them as an image to be generated. So I think it's a fine balance, but I think that also shows where the industry is, where the topic is, and where also the challenges lie when we capture that data.
It's very interesting. And of course, with the speed things are moving right now, kind of everybody is talking about AI. And you just said it, right? There is also now news coverage in all the different outlets. If we were to zoom out just a little bit, from the current discussion, from what's happening, what's developing on a weekly or even a monthly basis, where are we just, from your perspective, where are we in the grander scheme of AI development? Do you think it's overhyped right now? Do you think we're just, at the beginnings? Actually, probably we are technologically, but there is a saying that once your taxi driver talks to you about a certain thing, be it a stock option or even Bitcoin, maybe there is an argument that this is a little bit overhyped right now. So where are we in all of this discussion on AI and technological disruption?
So personally, I'm super excited about it because before ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022, like media and analysts were talking up that next AI winter where, well, actually we didn't see all the promises that the previous generation machine learning was supposed to meet and to fulfill. And maybe it's not that real and maybe it's not that easy and that simple to do. And then ChatGPT came around and it made AI, generative AI, and most of all the results that you can achieve so much more accessible, right? I can have them here on my phone with me at any point as long as I have an internet connection. I can ask it to do something for me and I get the results. I don't have to be a PhD student or graduate anymore. I don't need to have a training in statistics and optimization to get the benefits of AI. It's gotten a lot easier and a lot simpler to use it. I think that's huge. And that's a huge part also in why we are seeing taxi drivers having those conversations with us, right? And being more informed. That's the part that gets me super excited, that finally we're able to have these conversations. And in a business context, right, you're able to have this conversation with your C-level, even with your senior manager or more superior manager, in that sense, because they've all tried it out or they're being asked, well, what are you doing with AI? What's your AI strategy? So if you're in technology, if you're working on AI even, that opens up so many doors and opportunities that have been closed before or have been really, really hard to open. Now, is it overhyped? I think that's a great question. I think in the industry, there is a lot of excitement. There's a lot of buzz. On one hand, you have the venture capitalists, right, pouring money into these new companies and startups. On the other hand, they are producing really, really impressive results that can unlock even more of these promises, even in a short period of time. So I think last year we've seen a lot of the experimentation, a lot of the piloting. What is generative AI? What can you do with it? What are maybe some issues with it? What do we need to know about it? How can we use it? And I think this year, at least in business, what I see is companies are really starting to implement this, to roll this out, to get benefits from it. On one hand, because it's relatively easy to get started. Right? It's usually about text generation or summarization or translation is some of the more low-hanging fruit. And there's so much text in the business that makes sense to go after those. But then I think also business leaders, again, are being asked, well, how are you using it? When are you using it? So gone are the days that we're stuck in a proof of concept pilot mode for months, right? How quickly can we come up with an idea that delivers value? How quickly can we build it? And how quickly can we get it into the hands of our users or customers, again, safely, so that they can get benefits from it?
A good friend of mine actually works at a larger investment firm across Europe. They're funding young companies and also startups. And they actually made kind of a small and internal game out of it, because what they do is whenever they receive some pitches from new to be founded companies, startups, ventures, whatever, they literally started to keep track of the number of how often AI was mentioned in those pitch decks, and they sort them by descending order by the numbers of AI is mentioned in those slides, and they take the top one and they just take it out of the discussion, and they made fun of it. So that's there's just these signals that are flying around that give sense. But I share the excitement, of course. And in fact, in the earlier days, when I did my PhD research, we had access to early GPT models, command line, and all that stuff, and it was super exciting. But the layer of accessibility was simply missing, as you said. And of course, these models have not been as powerful as they are today, for sure. And the next ones are pretty much being more powerful, of course. But I agree, it's really that level of accessibility that made it possible to a large audience. But why should businesses care? How can AI give companies and businesses a competitive edge?
So maybe let me turn the question back to you. What's the part that you enjoy most about your day? Is it writing proposals? Is it answering emails? Any of those?
Absolutely not.
Right? So again, speaking of low-hanging fruit, right? Those are some exciting opportunities. Or think about then more on the commerce or sales side. How can you generate product descriptions that are really, really good because you have a lot of information already in your business systems? Or say in HR, right? You see this in your LinkedIn feed or social media feeds on a daily basis. Hey, how can you write a good resume with the help of generative AI? And on the other hand, how can you identify good candidates by processing those resumes with generative AI? So I, I think there are just a lot of opportunities today where business is so text heavy, also document heavy. I think it was Everest Group a couple of months or a year ago who said about 80 to 90% of data in a business is stored in documents. Typically, somebody needs to open a document, read it, or copy and paste something. Now, if you can process that with generative AI and you can get to the gist of it within a couple of seconds, perfect, right? You don't need to read it. You don't need to summarize it. Meetings, meeting minutes, things that you discuss. What are the action items again? Or maybe you joined late. Can you summarize that for me? I think there on a productivity side, there are already so many opportunities. And then like I said, whether it's HR or product descriptions and definitely sales and marketing, where there's a lot of copy that is being written, that goes on a website, it goes into a document. If you can enrich the prompt that even you or I would put into ChatGPT and give it a lot more context about your business, about the products, about the services that you offer, you can get to a really good result within seconds. I think that's the huge opportunity, especially getting to that good and good enough result, the good enough draft that you can work off.
And so what is a good place to start? I mean, we see, these days many jumping already into the solution space, right? So they start with an ideation workshop. They meet virtually, hybrid, on-site, whatever it is. Do a workshop, or obviously prompting large language models for his ideas too. Sort those ideas out and try to identify low-hanging fruits for use cases for text-based analytics, or even just literally ChatGPT or custom GPTs. Is that a good way to start? Should companies start somewhere earlier or later in the process? What is considered a good place to start?
So from my experience, the best place to start is with figuring out what is the business problem that we actually have, that we're trying to solve. Like there's so many opportunities with ChatGPT and similar tools in a business, but the question is, where do we actually have a need, and then where does that technology fit? I think otherwise you end up with use cases or scenarios where we are creating happier employees, right? Which is nice, right? And that's aspirational, but it's maybe not a business KPI or not something you can charge for more or you can monetize. It's important that we have happier employees and that work gets easier and more seamless and all of that. That's great. But I think there are more tangible business metrics and KPIs that you should be looking at to determine, is this something that we should pursue? And how do we believe that a certain scenario that we see will actually contribute to achieving that KPI or to improving that KPI? And I think that's also a bit of the challenge, right? Where do you start? How much knowledge do you need to have about the ability and capability of the technology, and how much knowledge do you need to have about your business process, and ideally, bring those two together. So I think when you bring technologists and business experts together, that's when you have the right combination, because everybody has their unique angle in between. Hey, here's a problem that we run into, I don't know, every week, every month, and here's a toolbox of capabilities and solutions coming together and determine what's the 1, 2, 3 things that we should be looking at is usually quite fruitful.
Obviously, starting with a problem is very powerful. I agree. It probably would also entail that you kind of need to know that it could potentially be solved with that technology. So you need to at least maybe have some kind of knowledge or awareness of what this thing actually is capable of and where the boundaries are today. Because obviously, it's not the magic button for everything. It is very powerful, but certainly, I guess, requires some prior knowledge. What can it do? What is not possible? What can be inputted even to it, like videos, for example? Yes, but maybe not ChatGPT or other models. So you kind of need to know the boundaries, I guess. In addition, yeah,
Yeah, I think so, definitely, right? So there's a bit of level setting, maybe a bit of enablement or education.
yeah,
On one hand, so by the way, when I do sessions in person or even virtual, and I ask in the audience how many have used ChatGPT and similar tools before, by now I see at least three quarters or more raise their hand and say, yes, I've used this. So that to me means people have somewhat of an understanding, and it's lowered that barrier of entry. We don't need to explain that, hey, these things are built based on data, and they learn, and you can improve them, and all these kind of things. That's still important to know, but people have already seen it. They already know what they can do with it and what they can do with just a text box and a prompt. And that's pretty powerful, right? So imagine if you had that available in your daily work. Where are situations where you create a lot of text, where you are spending a lot of time reviewing things or crafting things, and maybe they're not exactly perfect, so you need to spend more time creating them yourself or something? Or where would you have an intern that helps you gather information, summarize information, these type of things? And I think people can much better understand these examples because they have had a higher likelihood of using those tools in their personal life already.
yeah, yeah. And how do you get to those ideas that are, a combination of desirable, feasible, viable, and maybe later on even scalable at the time? Is there some sort of process that they can follow? Starting with a problem, sure, but how do you get to those ideas that actually make sense?
I think that's the $1 million question. Right? That's the one that you really need to get right, because otherwise you are spending a lot of time going off in a direction that maybe does not prove to be as valuable or as impactful as you might have thought initially. So feasibility or desirability, feasibility, viability, scalability, they're all critically important. I think desirability, is there a stakeholder in the business that agrees that this is a problem? Right? Maybe the subject matter expert thinks it's a problem. Maybe the IT team thinks it's a problem. Maybe the data team thinks it's a problem. But unless they all agree that, yes, this is really a problem and it's worth solving, you will run into issues, right? Maybe there's a lack of buy-in down the line. Maybe there's a lack of budget or funding. Maybe if there's a change in leadership or something in the organization, all of a sudden it's not as important anymore. But I feel if you have that alignment up front, and hey, this is really something that we want to go after and we want to solve and we need to solve because of the following reasons, there's a higher likelihood that you will also have that runway. I think feasibility, comes down to the question of, do we need data? Do we have data? How good is our data? The question is, fortunately or unfortunately, not going away. If you want to get good results and tangible and specific results that are aligned with your business and your process and really the problem that you are trying to solve in your company, you will still need data to augment these models, to augment these prompts. They're excellent at creating language like you and I would be creating and using and speaking, but they're not very good at specialty chemistry, for example, or some other real narrow domain knowledge, or the travel schedule, or the travel policy of your company. Viable, I think then again comes to, can we actually solve this with the resources we have in the time frame that we have? Do we need to throw more money at it? And how much money do we even need to throw at the problem? And even if we do throw all that money at it, is it still worth solving? And then I think where many projects also fail is that aspect of scalability, even at the end. Well, it works great in a lab. It was all right in a pilot. But once you roll it out globally to many different countries, regions, languages, whatever that may be, right? So you need to have that in mind as well, even at the beginning as you're thinking about desirability. And is that something that we want and something, again, that we could do? So I think thinking along those lines will help you inch closer to solving that $1 million question.
And are they all equally important at the same time? Because one could argue, we'll care about scalability later to the business, for example, or to, now the global, customer base or whatever it is. But you can also make the argument and say, you know what, if you build something now, but it's not going to scale for whatever reasons because there's not enough data or there's too much data or it's just computationally not possible right now, then why wouldn't you start this in the first place? So the question is, are they equally important at the same time?
I believe they are equally important because you are setting this up ideally for success, right? So you want to see how can I roll this out in a sense that it does have the largest business impact possible. But maybe again, scaling to your point means it's on a smaller scale for now. But if you just think about how do I do this on my laptop and my machine, that type of scale, I think that doesn't work, right? So you need to think about how do I maybe architect that for a certain number, again, of people, of users, of regions, of locations already from the beginning, so that it gets a lot easier getting there. And doesn't mean that you need to have all the resources in place and whatever, all the instances reserved and whatnot, and start paying for it. But at least with that in mind, how far do we want to take it and what do we need to do now to get there? I feel if you don't do that, then you're always in a situation, or you're running the risk of being in a situation where it's like an interim solution. And that interim solution, as many of us know, if you've been in IT, they usually stay for a long, long time. Long after the interns are gone and moved on, we have these little solutions and applications that nobody really knows anymore how they work. And everybody is afraid to turn them off because something disastrous might happen to the process or to the business. So that's why I think thinking with scalability in mind is really, really important. And again, all four to me are important, equally important.
In your work, and I actually follow your work and your publications quite frequently. You've spoken quite a bit about AI centers of excellence. Can you tell me what are those centers of excellence for AI?
So think about a company, maybe a leader that knows, hey, I need to do something with AI, but I'm not really sure exactly where I need to start or how I roll this out to my business and what I really need to do. So AI centers of excellence are an organizational setup or construct where you're bringing together resources from across the business, or maybe you hire them fresh into the company to help your business get more savvy in that topic. Meaning, on one hand, what is this technology even about? Think about AI. You might have some data scientists, you might have some developers that are savvy in these technologies. It also means what are the tools, what are the guidelines that we need to put in place in order to maybe do our first pilots and do our first proof of concepts. Then what are the processes? How do we gather ideas? How do we identify what are good use cases, good scenarios we want to go after? And how do we help our business understand what is the potential? So basically, many of the things that we are covering in this episode as well. And so have this as a nucleus for incubating this topic, for example, artificial intelligence, where there's a lot of uncertainty, for example. So it's about defining guidelines, standards, technologies, helping the business understand where and how can you use that technology, build a few pilots, proofs of concept, help get them into production, and then scale this topic of AI, for example, or any other technology topic into the organization, so that over time, your business functions and teams that support these business functions will be capable, will be enabled to do the work that this nucleus has done in the beginning.
And how do the inputs get to those centers of excellence? Like, are they thinking of use cases by themselves? Are they interviewing the business? Is there some liaison to different business groups and business teams? How does it work? How do they get their ideas that are potentially desirable, viable, and so on, and then work on them?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the key roles among many that the Center of Excellence plays, because that is building the relationship to those different business functions and business stakeholders. And what I've seen work really, really well is setting up things like a community or a community of multipliers. So where you invite individual subject matter experts from different parts of the business in more of a virtual project setting or team setting, if you will. And then on one hand, help them understand, hey, what is AI? What's generative AI? What can you do with it? Where do you have problems in your day-to-day? And then use them also as innovation outposts, if you will, or listening outposts, and they can bring ideas to you, and you can vet them together with them and see, is that, again, desirable, feasible, viable, scalable, for example. So really building that relationship, but also at the same time build that trust. And what's in it for those multipliers and champions is that within their business unit, they can be seen as an innovator, as somebody that's leading, somebody that's at the cutting edge of things. So, hey, if you want to know about AI, Bob's your guy, right? He's always at the forefront of these things. So you should talk to Bob, and I know he's well connected within the organization. So even if he doesn't know the answer to our question, he at least knows the people that he can reach out to. So it's awesome, right? It's awesome if you're leading that COE and you have that network, and it's also awesome being Bob, because your friends, your colleagues are looking up to you and know that you're knowledgeable and well connected in that area and that you can help them. So I think there's a mutual win-win in all of this.
That sounds very exciting, and for Bob, certainly for the organization, because that's how you can build awareness also across the organization. Now, in the playing field of corporate innovation, we've seen a similar thing. We've seen innovation labs rising a lot in the recent years or so. Teams that work on new concepts, whatever they are, before handing them over to the business. And they work in a similar way. Either they, receive challenges from the business and try to find, solutions, or they come up with ideas themselves. Oftentimes it's a mix, to a certain degree this and to a certain degree the other thing. But the major problem of these was always, and still is, that there was a gap from the solutions they've created, the pilots, concepts, whatever, to the business strategy, for one, and also, the outcomes needed by the business. So one, there was sometimes a misalignment to certain business problems if there was no communication. Or they created promising concepts, but then nobody from the business wanted to pick them up. There's no budget, there is no time, it's not as relevant, there is not invented here syndrome, all these things that you face, specifically in large companies. Do you feel we've faced the same risks with AI centers of excellence? And how could we help overcome them?
I think there are certainly similar risks, right? Even if you are this nucleus and say you're part of the whatever data and AI team or IT team, and you're supposed to work with all these different business functions. The challenge is, unless you open yourself up, unless you do build these connections to your multipliers, and unless you build that community, you're still working in a silo. You're still coming up with your own ideas of what you think is best and what the problem is and how we should solve it. And you're most likely going to solve it with technology in mind and for technology's sake, not for the business sake. So I think these relationships, these stakeholder connections, they're critical, because then you're adding value. You're part of this organization. You're part of this journey. You're not this team that looks at innovations 5 years, 10 years out in the future that has no connection to what we're doing today. And again, yes, it's not invented here, so why should I care about this and adopt this? It's a nice idea, right? It's an innovation, but we have business metrics, we have goals, we have problems to solve today. If you can make it tangible and show how the work that you are doing today with today's technologies and today's business stakeholders, how that delivers tangible business value today, ideally, or tomorrow, then I think then you have a seat at the table. You've earned the right to sit at the table, and those setups are usually much, much more successful and fruitful than some lofty innovation that might or might not materialize or some future scenario. So using tangible technology solving tangible problems today.
And are those centers of excellence also maybe, I don't know, are they maybe a good place to prepare businesses for the integration of AIs in ways we haven't seen yet? I mean, yes, we should work in the now, and solve challenges that we have right now. Yes, technology is moving so quickly that things we deemed impossible might be possible next year or even the next half year. But what about things where businesses want to prepare for the integration of AI in ways they haven't seen yet? Is also there's some experimental side to these AI centers of excellence that might be explored by those teams.
I think that's an excellent point. So thinking of more mid-sized, larger organizations, right, that do have different, maybe different divisions, different business units, maybe larger data AI, IT organization. That's, I think, where COEs, by the way, can really add value, where you have a critical mass and also a critical mass of teams and topics to support. So from there, I think that also gives you the flexibility on one hand, say, to work with your HR organization, which is probably a bit larger than one or two people, right, than in smaller organizations. So with a larger HR organization, you can define learning and development programs. What's maybe a curriculum that we want to curate, that we want to roll out to different parts of the business to educate our team members and colleagues, how can you use AI? To think about what are other opportunities that are beyond the here and now. I think that's one opportunity that is sometimes even missed. And the other one is definitely, right, you cannot only focus on the here and now. You need to build an innovation funnel and think about what are things that we will start working on, so we build towards that future vision of our company, of our product, of our service, and what are the steps that we can already take today towards achieving that vision. So you need to have a somewhat balanced portfolio, right? Not just only things that you're able to ship within the next couple of months, but building that pipeline of also exploration and tying that to your corporate vision.
Now, adding to that, I mean, there is indeed, of course, a broader discussion about how Gen AI is shaping the future of work, skills, capabilities. So from your experience, talking about those learning and development pathways or roadmaps, maybe, what do you think, what some of the skills are needed in the future for Gen AI beyond prompt engineering?
I think there are three key skills. They're universal. They apply to us as humans and our human connections as much as they will apply even more to generative AI. I think the first one is learning to ask better questions. That's a critical skill in business as a whole. We all learn in school or in college not to ask questions that can be answered with yes or no. Right? So what are those questions if you want to find something out? How do you keep them on one hand open-ended, but still not too open that you do get a specific response? I think the other one is giving better instructions. Right? If you're in a manager role today or you want to move into a manager role, you will learn that you need to give good instructions that are clear, that are tangible, that are easy to understand. You need to put some thought into how you formulate, how you articulate those instructions. Whether I'm working with a person or I'm working with an AI assistant or co-pilot or AI system, if you will, giving better instructions is key to getting to a good result a lot more quickly. Otherwise, I'll be spending time reiterating, reviewing, rephrasing things, time that I might as well have spent writing something myself or doing something myself. And then I think the third one is really learning to have more of that Socratic mindset and approach of learning to have a conversation and a back and forth, and even with the AI. And if you want to learn something, if you're inquisitive, you should ask follow-up questions, right? Not just leave it at one question, but why do you think that's the case? What are other perspectives that I should be considering or that somebody should be considering? Much like the conversation we're having in this episode as well. So I think those are three critical skills around asking better questions, giving better instructions, and learning to have more of a back and forth dialogue even with your AI.
which is, as you said before, it's not only a skill probably critical to interacting with an AI, but certainly with also humans as well, in private life, in business life, wherever. Yeah. And now in the grander scheme of things. So if we think of AI as a skill or capability in in a company, it's a set of technologies, obviously, right? It's not the one, but I think we could think of certain maturity levels, right? So you start, then you maybe begin to augment some of your processes with AI. And then there is probably another end or the other end of the spectrum, which is things are fully autonomously driven by AI. And obviously, we're not there yet in most of the places. But if you were to think about this trajectory and maturity levels, what do you think in some years from now? And I don't want to talk about the timeline and also not the crystal ball, because that's nothing we can't foresee, obviously. But if we move closer to an AI augmented than AI powered, and sometimes ultimately maybe even an AI driven future for businesses, if that's ever going to happen, what would that look like for the companies and also for the humans working at that companies?
So I'm glad you're taking out the timeline out of that perspective, because I agree with you. That's really, really hard, right? It's anybody's guess how fast we'll get there, or where and when we'll hit some bumps in the road. But again, the thing that gets me really, really excited when I think about the future and the future of business is that, yes, that there will be tasks that we will be able to delegate even more to applications that we use on a daily basis, that we use as business users, but sometimes maybe even in our personal lives, where there are tasks that these tools can take over for us. Maybe we're still in control. We review something. We say, yeah, that's good enough. Or out of a number of choices and options that AI provides to us, we can pick the best one. Maybe we even get a recommendation and says, hey, usually you pick number 1 or number 2 here. Do you want to do that again? But then I think going forward, there's this whole discussion and notion of agent and agentic AI, where we've already seen some first glimpses at the beginning of last year, and then with ChatGPT and OpenAI releasing the GPTs, the agents or somewhat agent-like components that you can create yourself. I think there's a huge potential for business as well, right? Agents that you can give a task or give a goal, and within defined boundaries, they can identify what are the next steps that I need to do. Maybe think about the future, booking a trip, for example, booking a business trip. Mm-hmm. Yes, today there are lots of tools and platforms, and they're fairly well integrated, and they use APIs to exchange information between the different providers. So in one booking, you can get your hotel and your car and maybe something else, your rail ticket or your Uber. Now, if you can delegate that task to an AI, and the AI can figure out, well, how do I more technically in the background make that API call to Marriott.com or to Hertz.com or to Uber? In how do I put in those boundaries? Because I know you usually like to travel business class if it's a flight of a certain length, and you usually choose a mid-size car, and so on. So making these decisions on your behalf, or even before we get to that fully autonomous phase, and if we even want to get there, that's a whole different question. But helping you with these tasks that you would need to do today yourself, and having more autonomy as we're delegating to software, as we're delegating to AI, I think that's a huge potential. One other thing that I'm excited and curious about. There's been a concept for a long time, I think for a couple of decades, around multi-agent systems. We have many of these agents that are interacting and interfacing with each other. And think about things like procurement, for example. You want to buy a certain quantity of a material. So maybe you can have an agent in the future that can represent your company and knows your procurement policies. And on the other hand, you might have an agent that your supplier has, with their policies of how they negotiate and how much wiggle room they have and how much discount they get and when they can ship. So I could see scenarios where there's at least in the beginning, some negotiation between systems happening, knowing the strategies, knowing the preferences, knowing the guidelines of these organizations. Ideally, we still want to have a human in the loop that reviews this. But again, over time, who knows how far out? Maybe even some of that negotiation can happen fully autonomous between these agents if we're all confident that they're acting in good faith, they're optimizing for the right variables, and so on and so on.
So one of the least favorable activities of mine is travel booking, and I need to travel quite a lot for business purposes. So I would totally buy in an AI agent that's gonna just do the job for me. I find the best rates, the best connections, the best time optimized, or sometimes even stress optimized route, depending on the distance. This would be a nice thing to have. Andreas, this conversation has been incredibly insightful so far. But before we leave, we do have a new tradition on this podcast. And so the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who my next guest is and what we're going to talk about. So my previous guest left a question for you, again, without knowing what we're going to talk about. And the question goes like this. What's one piece of advice you would give your younger self at the start of your career, knowing what you know now?
That's awesome. I love that question. I just had a session last night with a group of students at the university where I teach, and that was one of the questions as well. So if you're a young professional, what would be the advice that you give them? I think don't be afraid to get started and to take risks. Don't be afraid to ask for things, but also don't be afraid to put in the work, right? So that combination of things, and I think would be my advice. It certainly takes some time to build your expertise, build your careers. That's where the manage expectations and the putting in the work comes in. But also, again, the part about not being afraid to get started. Right now with AI, I see a lot of concerns. Well, especially if I'm entering the job market, isn't AI able to do the things that I can do now, fresh out of college? And my challenge also yesterday was to say, well, think about where it helps you do more, where it helps you accomplish things that you would otherwise spend a lot of time on, right? Or writing proposals, writing emails, things that we might not enjoy as much. If that can be taken out of your day and it's good enough and it's factually correct, perfect, right? It's a huge help. So there's a lot of opportunity as well in that, and seeing that opportunity, capturing that opportunity, chasing that opportunity. I think that's super exciting at this time if you're starting out in the market, in the business.
So it's lots of courage and also risk taking. Yeah,
absolutely.
Understand. Well, thank you, Andreas. Again, this has been really fantastic. And that's it already for this episode. Thanks again for being my guest and sharing your experience with the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
All right, and that's it. So thanks for listening and see you in the next episode. Take care and bye-bye.